The late afternoon sun blazed over downtown Austin, casting long shadows across the glass and steel towers that had transformed the Texas capital into a tech hub. Derek Monroe stood in his corner office at Resonance Media, watching the Congress Avenue Bridge below as thousands of bats began their nightly emergence. At 35 years old, he had built one of the most successful music streaming platforms in the country, a company that paid artists fairly while delivering curated content to 20 million subscribers. His platform had disrupted an industry, made him a fixture on tech conference stages, and earned him a fortune that would have seemed impossible when he was growing up in a modest house in South Austin. Yet none of those achievements meant as much to him as knowing his mother Ruth lived comfortably in the cottage behind his home in Tarrytown. Ruth Monroe had raised Derek alone after his father left when Derek was 6 years old. She had been a music teacher at a public middle school, giving piano lessons in their living room on evenings and weekends to supplement her meager salary. She had sold her own grandmother's antique piano, her most precious possession, to buy Derek his first computer when she saw his aptitude for coding. She never complained about the sacrifice, never made him feel guilty for her choices. Now at 69 years old, she lived in the renovated cottage on Derek's property, a cozy space with a beautiful upright piano Derek had bought her, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden, and shelves filled with sheet music and books about composers. Her dark hair had turned to elegant silver, worn long and often pulled back in a loose bun, and her brown eyes still held the warmth of someone who had spent a lifetime teaching children to love music. Cassandra Blake had entered Derek's world 18 months ago at South by Southwest, the massive music and tech festival that overtook Austin each spring. She was stunning, 32 years old with sleek black hair cut in a sharp bob, piercing blue eyes and the kind of effortless cool that came from years in the LA entertainment industry. She worked in music PR, representing major labels and artists, and she had connections that opened doors Derek's money alone couldn't. Cassandra had made him feel like he finally belonged in the world he had disrupted, like his working-class Austin roots could be polished away with the right partner by his side. 5 months ago, he had proposed to her at the Austin City Limits Music Festival, and she had said yes with what seemed like genuine joy. The wedding was planned for October, a hip affair at an East Austin venue with 200 guests from the music and tech industries. Everything appeared perfect. Derek had the success, the innovation, the glamorous fiancée with industry connections, and his mother living peacefully nearby. He felt he had achieved the creative and financial freedom his mother had worked so hard to make possible. If only he had been paying closer attention, he might have noticed the discord beneath the harmonious surface. Ruth sat at the piano in the cottage, her hands resting on the keys, but not playing. She couldn't concentrate, couldn't find the music that usually brought her peace. Her left wrist ached where Cassandra had grabbed and twisted it yesterday, leaving bruises hidden under her long sleeves. She glanced nervously toward the main house, watching for any sign of Cassandra's black Tesla. Cassandra had left for a meeting an hour ago, but Ruth never felt truly safe anymore. The anxiety was constant now, a dissonant note that never resolved. It had started subtly, perhaps 3 months after the engagement. At first, just cutting remarks, comments about how Ruth's teaching career was so small-time, how her clothes were frumpy, how it must be embarrassing for Derek to have a mother who still lived like a middle-class teacher. Ruth had tried to ignore it, telling herself Cassandra was stressed about the wedding, or adjusting to Austin after LA. But the verbal cruelty had escalated into physical violence. Cassandra had discovered that there were many ways to hurt someone. She would mock Ruth's love of classical music, calling it pretentious and boring and turning up harsh electronic music whenever Ruth tried to play piano. She would accidentally knock over Ruth's sheet music, scattering pages she had carefully organized. She had once grabbed a crystal vase, a gift from Derek, and smashed it against the wall near Ruth's head, glass shards flying everywhere, then laughed and said Ruth had startled her. The psychological torture was constant, but Cassandra also employed physical violence when she felt it was safe. She had grabbed Ruth's wrists hard enough to leave deep bruises. She had shoved Ruth into the piano bench, causing Ruth to hit her ribs painfully against the wood. She had thrown a coffee mug that shattered inches from Ruth's face, and she had explicitly threatened that if Ruth ever told Derek, Cassandra would convince him his mother was becoming mentally unstable, that the confusion and accidents were signs of early dementia. Ruth had tried to convince herself she was overreacting, that perhaps she had somehow provoked these incidents. But her body bore the evidence: the bruises, the constant anxiety, the way her hands now shook too much to play complex piano pieces. And Ruth, who had spent her entire life protecting and nurturing her son, couldn't bear the thought of destroying his happiness by exposing the woman he was so excited to marry. So she remained silent, absorbing the abuse in private, making excuses when Derek noticed her declining state. She told him she was tired, that arthritis was affecting her playing, that she was naturally clumsy. He believed her because he was consumed with product launches, licensing deals, and expansion plans that had resonance media poised to go public. But someone was paying attention. Sophie Martinez was 15 years old, lived next door with her parents, and had been taking piano lessons from Ruth since she was 7. Sophie had her lesson every Tuesday afternoon, and lately she had noticed disturbing changes. Miss Ruth seemed scared, jumpy. She had bruises, she flinched at loud noises. And twice, Sophie had arrived early and heard shouting, a woman's voice, cruel and vicious, coming from the cottage. Today Sophie arrived for her lesson, and found Ruth sitting on the cottage porch, her face pale, her hands shaking. "Miss Ruth, are you okay?" Sophie asked, concerned. Ruth forced a smile. "I'm fine, dear. Just a little tired today. Should we start with your scales?" But as they began the lesson, Sophie noticed fresh bruises on Ruth's wrists when her sleeves rode up. And then they both heard it, the sound of Cassandra's car pulling into the driveway. Ruth's entire body tensed, fear flashing across her face, so clearly that Sophie couldn't ignore it. "Miss Ruth?" Sophie whispered urgently. "Are you scared of her?" Ruth's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. "Sophie, please, don't." The cottage door flew open and Cassandra walked in without knocking, her face already twisted with irritation. "You're still doing these pathetic lessons?" she said to Ruth, ignoring Sophie entirely. "I thought I told you to cancel them. They're a waste of your time and an embarrassment to Derek." "Cassandra, Sophie has her lesson every Tuesday," Ruth said quietly, her voice shaking. "I can't just cancel." "You'll do what I tell you," Cassandra interrupted coldly. Then she seemed to notice Sophie for the first time, and her expression shifted slightly, became more controlled. "Lesson's over, kid. Get out." Sophie felt anger rising in her chest. She'd known Miss Ruth her whole life, had attended her wedding to Mr. Monroe before he left, had seen her at every school concert. And this woman, this stranger, was talking to her like she was garbage. "I have 30 minutes left in my lesson," Sophie said, her voice steady despite her fear. "My mom paid for the full hour." Cassandra's eyes narrowed. "I said get out." "It's okay, Sophie," Ruth said quickly, standing up. "We can make up the time next week. Please, just go." Sophie looked at Ruth's frightened face, at the way she was literally trembling, and made a decision. She gathered her sheet music slowly, deliberately, watching as Cassandra moved closer to Ruth in a way that felt threatening. As Sophie reached the door, she turned back. "I'll see you next Tuesday, Miss Ruth. Same time." She left, but she didn't go home. Instead, Sophie pulled out her phone and did something she had been too scared to do before. She texted Derek Monroe. She had his number, because he had given it to all Ruth's regular students, telling them to reach out if they ever needed anything, or if something seemed wrong with his mother. At the time, Sophie had thought it was sweet, but unnecessary. Now she understood. "Mr. Monroe, this is Sophie Martinez, your neighbor. I think Miss Ruth might be in trouble. Your fiancé just kicked me out of my piano lesson." And Miss Ruth looked really scared. "I've been worried about her for weeks. She has bruises and she's not herself. Please come home and check on her." Sophie hit send, her heart pounding. Then she waited, hidden behind the hedge between their properties, watching the cottage. She knew she should go inside her own house, knew her parents would be worried if they knew what she was doing. But something told her to wait, to watch, to be ready to call 911 if needed. Derek was in a meeting with his CFO and legal team, discussing the IPO timeline, when his phone buzzed. He normally wouldn't check during important meetings, but something made him glance at the screen. When he saw Sophie's message, his blood went cold. He stood up abruptly. "I need to go. Family emergency. We'll reschedule." He didn't wait for responses, just grabbed his keys and ran to his car. The drive from downtown to Tarrytown normally took 20 minutes. Derek made it in 12, breaking multiple traffic laws and not caring. Sophie's message had unlocked something in his mind, all the signs he had been too busy to properly see. His mother's weight loss that Cassandra had attributed to finally getting healthy. The way Ruth had stopped inviting him to hear her play piano. The bruises she explained away as clumsiness. The fear he had glimpsed in her eyes when Cassandra was around, quickly hidden when she thought he was watching. Derek pulled into his driveway, not bothering to close the garage, and ran toward the cottage. Through the window he could see Cassandra and his mother, and what he saw made his heart stop. Cassandra had Ruth backed into the corner by the piano. She was shouting, her face twisted with rage, and as Derek watched in horror, she grabbed a framed photo from the piano, Derek's college graduation photo, and threw it at Ruth. The frame hit the wall next to Ruth's head, glass shattering, and Ruth cried out, bringing her arms up to protect her face. "You pathetic, useless old woman." Cassandra was screaming, "You're ruining everything. Derek's embarrassed by you. Everyone talks about how his mother is just some has-been music teacher, and after we're married, you're gone. I'm putting you in the cheapest nursing home I can find and selling this cottage." Ruth was crying now, her back literally against the wall, and Derek saw his mother, his strong, dignified mother, who had sacrificed everything for him, reduced to a terrified, cowering figure. Derek didn't remember crossing the yard, or opening the door. But suddenly he was inside the cottage, and his voice, when he found it, was shaking with rage. "Get away from her." Cassandra spun around, and for just a moment, Derek saw something on her face that looked almost like satisfaction, as if she wanted him to see this, wanted him to choose between them. But then she seemed to realize from his expression that she had miscalculated, and her face shifted to feigned concern. "Derek, thank God you're here. Your mother has been having these episodes. She threw that frame herself." "I saw you," Derek said, his voice deadly quiet now. "I saw you throw it at her. I heard what you said." He moved past Cassandra, going directly to Ruth. His mother was shaking violently, glass shards in her silver hair, tears streaming down her face. Derek pulled her into his arms, feeling how thin she had become, how fragile. "Mom," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Over Ruth's shoulder, Derek looked at Cassandra, and what he felt wasn't just anger, it was a cold, calculated fury. "How long?" he asked his mother quietly. "Months," Ruth whispered against his shoulder. "I'm sorry, Derek. I should have told you. She said you'd think I was losing my mind. She said you—" "No," Derek said firmly. "No, Mom. This is not your fault. This is her fault." He looked at Cassandra. "And mine, for bringing her into your life. For being too busy to see what was happening." Cassandra's mask was slipping now, revealing cold contempt beneath. "Your mother is a burden, Derek. She doesn't fit in your world. Do you think anyone in the music industry cares that your mother was a middle school music teacher? They laugh about it behind your back. I've been trying to help you understand that you need to leave that past behind if you want to be taken seriously." The cruelty of the words, the calculated viciousness, left Derek momentarily breathless. But then something crystallized in his mind with perfect clarity. "Get out," he said quietly. "Derek, be reasonable." "Get out!" The shout seemed to shake the cottage. Derek never raised his voice. But he was beyond fury now, moving into a cold rage that was far more dangerous. "Get out of my house. Get off my property. Get out of my life. We're done. The engagement is over. The wedding is cancelled. You have 1 hour to remove your belongings before I have you physically removed." Cassandra's face transformed, her beauty warping into something ugly. You're throwing away everything we have because of this. If you finish that sentence, Derek interrupted, his voice ice cold, I will make it my personal mission to destroy your career. I know every major label executive, every PR firm owner, every music industry player that matters, and I will tell them exactly what you did. So I suggest you take your hour and leave quietly. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling my lawyer and my security team. And Cassandra, if you ever come near my mother again, if I ever hear that you've told anyone any lies about her, I will use every resource I have to bury you so deep in the industry that you'll never work in music again. Do you understand me? Cassandra stared at him for a long moment, perhaps finally realizing she had catastrophically miscalculated. Derek Monroe might have wanted industry acceptance, but he was still the kid whose music teacher mother had sold her grandmother's piano for him, and she had just made the fatal error of hurting the one person who mattered more than anything else. She left without another word, her footsteps angry on the gravel path. Derek heard her car start and screech away, and only then did he allow himself to fully feel the weight of what had just happened. He helped Ruth sit down on the piano bench carefully, because she winced when she moved, and knelt in front of her, taking her hands gently. Mom, I need you to tell me everything. Every time she hurt you, every threat she made, everything. And Ruth, finally safe to speak the truth, told him. The months of psychological torture and physical violence, the smashed belongings and thrown objects, the threats about nursing homes and dementia claims, the isolation and fear that had stolen her joy in music and in life itself. Derek listened, his heart breaking with each revelation, his guilt settling like a stone in his chest. When Ruth finished, he wrapped his arms around her again, and they both cried, Ruth with relief and release, Derek with shame and determination. Finally, Derek pulled back and looked at his mother seriously. I'm calling the police to file a report, and a doctor to examine you, and a therapist who specializes in trauma, and I'm taking a leave of absence from residence. I'm going to be here with you until you feel safe again, and I swear to you, nothing like this will ever happen to you again, as long as I live. Ruth started to protest that he didn't need to take time off, but Derek cut her off, gently. Mom, you sold your grandmother's piano for me. You worked 3 jobs so I could have opportunities. You gave me everything. And I almost let someone destroy you because I was too busy and too blind. So no, I'm not asking. I'm staying. He made the calls. Police, doctor, lawyer, security company. And then he texted Sophie. Thank you for being braver than I was. You may have saved my mother's life. I'll never forget what you did. Sophie's response came quickly. Miss Ruth is the best. I'm glad she's okay. Is she still going to teach me? I have a recital next month. Derek smiled through his tears. She'll teach you for as long as you want lessons. And they're free from now on. Thank you, Sophie. In the weeks that followed, Derek restructured his entire life. He promoted his COO to interim CEO and stepped back from daily operations. He moved into the main house's guest room so he was always nearby if Ruth needed him. He arranged for a therapist, for medical care, for security that made Ruth feel protected. But more than logistics, Derek spent time just being present with his mother. They talked about things they'd never had time to discuss. Ruth played piano again, tentatively at first, her hands shaking, but gradually regaining confidence. Derek sat and listened to her play, really listened, and remembered why music mattered, why his whole business existed, not to make him rich or famous, but to connect people to the art that gave life meaning. One evening, about 2 months after Cassandra's expulsion, Ruth said something that changed Derek's trajectory. I've been thinking, she said carefully, about how many other elderly people might be going through what I went through. People who don't have a son like you, who don't have a brave neighbor like Sophie. Derek had been thinking the same thing. His research into elder abuse had revealed horrifying statistics. 1 in 10 older adults experienced abuse, most often from family members or intimate partners. and victims with backgrounds in arts and education were particularly vulnerable. Often isolated, living on fixed incomes, easy targets for financial and psychological manipulation. But Derek didn't want to build a foundation or a nonprofit. He wanted to create something that fit naturally into his world, music and technology. He started developing a program that partnered with music therapists, art therapists, and community centers to create safe spaces for elderly people, particularly those who had been artists, teachers, musicians in their younger lives. The program was called Silver Sound. It offered free music and art classes for seniors, creating communities where isolated elderly people could connect through creativity, but it was also a protective network. Staff were trained to recognize signs of abuse, to build trust, to provide resources and referrals. The program included wellness checks, support groups, connections to legal services, all wrapped in the welcoming package of music lessons, art classes, and community performances. Derek funded it generously and used his music industry connections to bring in volunteer teachers, professional musicians who donated time to teach seniors. Ruth became the program's heart, teaching piano to elderly students who had always wanted to learn or who were rediscovering music after years away from it. It was at a Silver Sound community concert that Derek met Layla Hassan. She was a music therapist who had started volunteering with the program, working specifically with seniors who had experienced trauma. Derek noticed her immediately, not just because she was beautiful with warm brown eyes, long dark hair, and an infectious smile, but because of how she interacted with the elderly participants. She listened to their stories with genuine interest, encouraged them with authentic enthusiasm, created space for them to express themselves without judgment. After the concert, they ended up talking in the parking lot. Layla was 34, had immigrated from Egypt with her family when she was 12, and had become a music therapist after seeing how music had helped her grandmother process the trauma of displacement. She spoke passionately about the healing power of creativity, about how art and music could restore dignity and agency to people who had been made to feel powerless. Derek found himself drawn to Layla's authenticity, her deep understanding of trauma and healing, her commitment to serving rather than being served. But he was cautious now, wary in a way he'd never been before Cassandra. He had been so wrong about someone he thought he knew. Over the following months, Derek and Layla kept crossing paths at Silver Sound events, at music therapy conferences. Derek now attended at the community centers where the program operated. Their friendship developed naturally, built on shared values and genuine connection. Layla met Ruth multiple times, and the bond between them was obvious. Layla would ask Ruth about her teaching days, bring Middle Eastern sweets to share, remember the names of Ruth's former students when she told stories about them. Ruth watched carefully, protective but hopeful. She saw how Layla treated everyone the same, whether they were tech millionaires or seniors on Medicare, whether they had influence or had nothing to offer. She saw how Layla's kindness was consistent, not performative, how her work was about service rather than status. Nearly a year after Cassandra's expulsion, Derek finally asked Layla on an actual date. They went to a small Ethiopian restaurant in East Austin that Layla loved. Nothing fancy, just authentic food and real conversation. That dinner stretched into 3 hours of talking, laughing, sharing stories about their mothers and what they wanted their lives to mean. When Derek walked Layla to her car, she kissed him, warm and genuine, and told him she'd been wondering if he was ever going to stop being so careful around her, that she understood why he was protective, but that she was here and real, and not going anywhere. Their relationship was everything his engagement to Cassandra hadn't been. Layla didn't care about his net worth or his industry connections. She drove a practical Honda, lived in a modest apartment, and was perfectly happy with food truck dinners and live music at small venues. What she valued was authenticity, healing, meaningful work. She made Derek laugh, challenged him when he fell back into status-seeking patterns, reminded him that success was measured in lives touched, not revenue generated. Ruth watched her son fall in love again, genuinely this time, and felt only joy. She got to know Layla through dinners at the cottage, volunteering together at Silver Sound events, playing piano together, Layla on percussion instruments, creating rhythms that complemented Ruth's melodies. When Layla brought her grandmother to meet Ruth, and the three women sat together sharing music and stories from their different cultures, Ruth knew this was real. One Sunday afternoon, about 15 months after Cassandra had been expelled from their lives, Derek found his mother in the cottage, playing a Chopin nocturne. He sat beside her on the piano bench and listened until she finished. After a comfortable silence, he told Ruth that he was thinking about asking Layla to marry him. He wanted to know what his mother thought. Ruth set her hands in her lap and looked at her son with those warm brown eyes. "Layla is everything that woman wasn't," she said simply. "She's genuine. She's kind. She values healing and helping over status and appearance. And most importantly, she loves you for who you truly are, including where you come from and who raised you." She paused, then smiled. "But Derek, you don't need my permission. You know Layla is right for you. I see it in how you are together. You're more yourself, more like the boy I raised to love music and creativity and community." Derek felt tears prick his eyes. "I almost married someone who literally tried to throw things at your head, Mom. How can I trust my own judgment?" "Because you learned," Ruth said firmly. "And because you're being careful now, which is wise. But don't let that woman's cruelty make you doubt something good. You know the difference now. Trust that knowledge." Derek proposed to Layla on a quiet evening at a Silver Sound community concert. Surrounded by elderly people making music together, Ruth playing piano accompaniment for a choir of seniors singing old standards. There was no spectacle, no Instagram moment, no performance for an audience. Just two people who had found something real in each other, built on shared purpose and authentic love. Layla said yes, through happy tears, and they celebrated with Ruth and Layla's grandmother over homemade Middle Eastern and American food at the cottage, making music together late into the night. The wedding, when it happened, was nothing like what Derek had planned with Cassandra. It was held at one of the community centers where Silver Sound operated, decorated by program participants and volunteers. There were 200 people, former students, music therapists, Silver Sound participants, elderly people, whose lives had been changed by the program, musicians from Austin's diverse communities, no music industry press, no tech reporters, no strategic guest list, just people who actually mattered, celebrating something genuine. Derek's vows made everyone cry because they were so honest. He talked about how his mother had taught him that real wealth was in creativity and community, that success was measured in lives enriched, not bank accounts fattened, that the most important work was often invisible and undercompensated. He thanked Lila for helping him rediscover those values after he'd almost lost them, for loving not just him but his mother, for understanding that healing was more important than hustling. Derek and Layla built a life that prioritized meaning over metrics. They lived in the Terrytown house with Ruth, who remained in her beloved cottage, but was fully integrated into daily life. Derek continued to lead Resonance Media, but devoted equal time to Silver Sound, which had expanded to serve thousands of elderly people across Texas. The program had evolved based on participant feedback, adding different art forms beyond music, creating intergenerational programs that connected isolated seniors with young people like Sophie, providing transportation to classes, offering support groups for abuse survivors, partnering with legal aid for elderly people facing exploitation. It had helped dozens of documented elder abuse cases come to light, and had provided community and purpose for thousands more. But more than the numbers, Derek found meaning in the individual stories. The elderly jazz musician in East Austin, whose nephew was stealing his Social Security checks, discovered through a Silver Sound volunteer who noticed he couldn't afford his insulin. The retired art teacher in South Austin, whose daughter was emotionally abusing her, who finally spoke up after joining a painting class and building trust with other participants. The grandmother in Terrytown, not unlike Ruth, whose wealthy family was neglecting her medical needs, identified when she mentioned pain during a music therapy session. Each story reminded Derek of his mother, of how easily she could have been permanently damaged or killed if Sophie hadn't been paying attention, if he hadn't listened, if he hadn't witnessed the truth with his own eyes. Years passed peacefully. Derek and Layla had 3 children, raising them in a home filled with music, creativity, and service. Ruth became the grandmother she was meant to be, teaching all the kids piano, sharing stories about their father's childhood, showing them that the best things in life can't be monetized. When Ruth passed away peacefully at 77, it was in her beloved cottage, surrounded by sheet music and photos of grandchildren at their recitals. At her funeral, Derek gave a eulogy that was unflinchingly honest about everything: his pursuit of industry success that had blinded him, Cassandra's cruelty toward his mother, Sophie's courage in speaking up, his eventual awakening, and the work that had come from it. "My mother taught me 2 fundamental lessons," Derek said to the packed church. "First, through her decades of teaching and sacrifice, she showed me that music and art aren't luxuries, they're necessities, they're what make us human, they're what connect us to each other, and to meaning. And second, through her suffering and survival, she taught me that we all have a responsibility to pay attention, to speak up when we see wrong, to use whatever resources we have to protect the vulnerable and create communities of care." He paused, looking at Layla and their children in the front row. "I spent years building a business, accumulating wealth, chasing respect from an industry that didn't matter. I almost married someone who required me to be ashamed of where I came from and who raised me. My mother's abuse, and Sophie's courage, and my discovery of the truth shattered my misplaced priorities and gave me the chance to build something meaningful. I hate that Mom suffered. I hate that someone I brought into her life hurt her. But I'm grateful that Sophie was brave enough to text me, that I listened, that I saw the truth, that we had those final years together building something that now helps thousands of other people's mothers." The years continued. Silver Sound kept growing, expanding to other cities, becoming a model that communities across the country replicated. Derek and Layla grew old together. Their children grew up understanding that creativity was a form of service, that art healed, that community was everything. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, Derek would sit in Ruth's cottage at the piano she had loved, and he would play the Chopin nocturnes she had taught him decades ago. He would think about the journey that had brought him here, the ambition and blindness, the betrayal and awakening, the guilt and redemption, the loss and the meaningful work built from that loss. He thought about Cassandra sometimes, not with anger, but with a kind of distant understanding. She had been the crisis that had forced him to see clearly, the catalyst that had shattered his shallow values, the force that had redirected his success toward actual meaning. But mostly he thought about his mother, her gentle strength, her love of music and teaching, her sacrifice that had never wavered. She had wanted him to be successful, yes, but she had wanted even more for him to use his success to create beauty and community, to remember that art and creativity were how humans connected and healed. And in the end, Derek had learned. It had taken Sophie's bravery and a terrible discovery, and he would always carry guilt for not seeing sooner. But he had learned, and he had built a life on the right foundation. Not metrics but meaning, not status but service, not performance but authentic connection through art and music. Derek Monroe had chased industry acceptance and almost married someone who required him to abandon his roots and hurt his mother. But Ruth's suffering had opened his eyes, and he had spent the rest of his life honoring her sacrifice by finally understanding what she had always known: that music heals, that creativity connects, that community protects, that art matters more than algorithms ever could. The Silver Sound program would continue creating healing spaces for elderly people long after Derek was gone, a living monument to a music teacher who had endured abuse in silence until her son finally heard her. That was Ruth Monroe's legacy, not suffering, but the transformation of her son, and through him, the healing of thousands of others, through the power of music and community. Every story carries within it an echo of our shared humanity. If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone special. Leave us a comment about what you felt, and subscribe to join us for more soul-reaching stories. Because every life tells a story that deserves to be heard. See you next time.